Hi everyone, Daria Kirk from Plum Realty. Today we have Christie Esau with us. Christie is a registered psychotherapist, and we thought we'd talk about mental health during the pandemic and perhaps some coping strategies and what you can do to ease your mental health during these very unprecedented times. So, Christie, thanks so much for joining us. Really
No problem. Happy to be here.
yeah, really appreciate you taking the time to join us. So I wanted to give people some coping strategies or things you might be recommending that people do. This is very stressful for many people for various reasons, whether it's financial stress, medical stress, like you're concerned about your health, you have your children at home, lots of things that are stressing people out. So I thought we'd just chat about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again for having me here. Even though it's a video, it's all a little bit strange for people as we're adjusting. First thing that I often have been sharing with folks I'm working with now is that if you're feeling like afraid or sad or helpless, that sort of stuff right now, even though those things are really uncomfortable for people and we don't like that, it's actually a really normal response given that we're experiencing something really unprecedented and that it's a global pandemic. Um, so it's actually okay to not be feeling okay right now. That doesn't mean there's anything sort of wrong with you or that you're coping poorly necessarily. It's a pretty big and pretty scary thing for a lot of people. Um, One of the big things that I would emphasize in terms of coping with sort of the fears around physical health is doing your best to adhere to the things that are put forward by public health in our city. Obviously not doing that in a very like intense and fear sort of oriented way, but to do your best to adhere to the standards set out by public health. So things like making sure that we're washing our hands really well and doing physical distancing, limiting the amount of time that we're leaving our homes and not really interacting with other folks, even though that's really, really complicated and painful probably to do. In a mental health perspective, sort of the flip side of some of that stuff is to make sure that we're doing our best to connect with others in non sort of like physically close ways. So whether that's, texting or messaging with your close friends or things like having group video chats. That's something I've been doing with some of my really close girlfriends that live in British Columbia. We have like a weekly afternoon sort of tea appointment where we all just like get on Facebook Messenger video and talk for a bit. Even things like sort of drive by someone's porch and like chat from your car to their home, and ensuring that we've got some form of contact with our regular social connections, our friends, and even our coworkers is actually really valuable for mental health. Another thing that I've personally found really helpful is trying to pay attention to how much intake of media I have in it from a day-to-day basis. So lots of us will have varying degrees of tolerance for, sitting and watching the news and hearing all the updates. It's sometimes really valuable to have good information, but sometimes that sort of tips us over into feeling a lot more anxious and more afraid than is helpful. So I encourage folks to sort of pay attention to if you're watching the news or checking social media multiple times a day, how are you feeling after that? And if it's not a nice feeling, to maybe sort of gently try to decrease the amount of time that we're spending accessing the news and the media about this. The other big sort of coping, mental health, supportive self-care thing that I really believe strongly in a general sense, but believe is really important right now, is attending to our basic bodily needs, which sounds kind of silly to some people. Like, oh, I breathe, I eat, I sleep. But when those things get a little bit wonky for us, we start to feel pretty bad pretty fast. So making sure that we're getting good quality rest as much as we're able, getting enough water and food that feels good for our bodies. Actually, like if we're people who take medication already, continuing to take our medication regularly, moving, whether it's outside or inside, and making sure we get like some actual fresh springtime air, even if it's standing out on your balcony or your back porch, or just like popping your head out the window for a few minutes to actually get a little bit of fresh air, I think can be really supportive for all of us who feel very cooped up in our houses right now. So those are some of the first like general type things that I would suggest, encourage people to try out.
Okay. And for those people who have their children at home with them, that adds a layer of stress, and perhaps talking to children about what's happening right now, and any ideas about that, perhaps?
Yeah, so I mean, many people have probably seen this circulating online, but one of the things I thought that is really important is when we've been talking about the idea of shifting to work from home, which many people do already and maybe have a sort of setup that works well for them. But there's quite a difference between working from home and trying to work from home during a pandemic. So I think step one is sort of making space for ourselves to not be our most productive selves, and to actually acknowledge that, like, oh, this is actually maybe really stressful for me, and maybe I'm not going to be able to do like a good solid 8 productive hours of work in my day. The same thing is true, I think, for people with kiddos. One of my friends who is in regular life is a homeschool parent and happens to also be trained as an epidemiologist, which is a bit of a funny irony for her right now. She has made a distinction between, please recognize people who aren't normally homeschooling. You're not homeschooling, you're crisis schooling. You've suddenly been tossed into an ocean and your children are home, and no one should be expecting you to educate them the same amount of time or to the same degree that they are in a school context. Also, I think one of the things that's kind of a helpful idea is a colleague of mine who's both her and her partner are working, and they are a parent to a young child. They've come up with a bit of a, like, not a really rigid, but a gentle schedule for themselves. So they take what they call shifts. So this hour, she'll be working, following up with her clients while her partner watches their child, and then they'll sort of shift. So the childcare responsibilities aren't falling wholly to one person who then isn't able to do their sort of work from home responsibilities. I think that's a sort of a helpful framework to have. Also, one of the things that's hard to do, but is probably pretty important for all of us in the current circumstances, is trying to be flexible when it comes to like accomplishing work or spending time with our kids, to make sure that maybe there are times where we need to be doing our work earlier in the morning or later in the evening or spread out over the weekend. Maybe there are times where kids need to access more screen time than we would like, or need to be just doing some like good outdoor, I'm going to play with my siblings time. And maybe that doesn't look like traditional school, but I think that's actually a kind of flexibility that's really important, especially when kids right now, what we want children to remember is not that there was a big, scary sort of pandemic, but that they would have sort of fond memories of this time when they're staying at home. Oh, wow, mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, or whoever are home together all the time. And we got to watch lots of movies together and go on lots of walks with a dog. Like, that's the kind of memories that I think we would hope that all of our kiddos would have of this time.
Awesome. Awesome. Any other last pieces of advice to give to people in terms of trying to stay centered and sane during this crazy time?
Yeah, well, I think one thing I already mentioned is the idea of like taking care of our own basic bodily needs. And one of the things within that is making sure we're breathing well, which again sounds a little silly because if humans weren't breathing, we wouldn't be alive. However, I think it's really important for people to know that like this situation with COVID-19 is really like traumatic for a lot of people. It's very frightening and very elicits a lot of feelings of not knowing what's going to happen and not having any control. And so if we're actually getting like really good deep breaths, like a long breath in through our nose and then out through our mouth, a bunch of those actually tells the part of our brain that activates the fight, flight, freeze response to chill out a little bit. So if you're starting to notice like you're getting quite activated about something, even just 3, 4, 5 long, deep, slow breaths will help tell your brain that like you're not actually in immediate danger, and can help you sort of ground yourself a little bit more.
Amazing. Thanks, Christy.
No problem.
Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, and
Yeah.
everyone who sees this, I hope will appreciate it as well. I
Yeah.
hope you and your husband stay healthy and stay safe.
Yeah. Thanks. Ditto.
Thanks, Christy.
No problem. Bye.